Your audio, video, and the group chat are turned off today to streamline the presentation. And please submit questions at any time using the Q&A box. Finally, this session is being recorded. Just look for an email from us in the next week letting you know that it's ready. Now I'm pleased to introduce our host for today's webinar, Emily Haynes, fundraising reporter here at the Chronicle.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to introduce our two expert guests. First, we have Angie Lane, who oversees fundraising at Houston Ballet, which held a successful hybrid ball in the spring of 2021. Previously, she held leadership positions at Houston Grand Opera, American National Red Cross, and Girls Incorporated. Angie is a certified fundraising executive and often teaches fundraising courses at the Rice University Glasscock School of Continuing Studies. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Emily.
I'm also pleased to welcome Samantha Swaim, founder of Swaim Strategies, a consulting firm that helps nonprofits in the U.S. and abroad produce all kinds of fundraising events. She has more than 20 years of event planning and fundraising experience and is co-author of the book, Planning a Successful Major Donor Event. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
Before we learn from our guests, I'd like to share a bit of context about our topic today. Many nonprofits rely on galas and other fundraising events to raise revenue, often to cover unflashy essentials like utilities and staff benefits. Among nearly 2,000 nonprofit professionals who responded to a recent survey, almost half said their organization raised 20% or more of its annual operating budgets through events. But with the new Omicron variant of the coronavirus spreading across the globe, charities may not be able to rely on traditional gatherings to raise money this year. Some groups are hedging their bets by planning events with both in-person and online components. According to that same survey by OneCause, a fundraising technology firm, half of respondents said their groups are planning hybrid events for 2022. Today, our guests will share their advice and lots of real-world examples to help your nonprofit run a hybrid event that delivers. Without further delay, let's get started. Our first question is going to go to Samantha. Sam, your company has helped many nonprofits develop successful fundraising events over the past 2 years. What kinds of things should fundraisers think about when planning a hybrid gathering? Are there certain elements that every event should include to get best results?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's really important that we start first by considering all of the puzzle pieces. So in my mind, there's sort of the before COVID, what we've learned from COVID, and now how we're moving out of COVID. So prior to the world going virtual, in our gatherings, there were 3 key elements that we used to build into every single event that were really founded out of Susan Howlett's research, a fundraising researcher in the Seattle area, in which she identified that there are 3 key reasons why people give. First, people are really motivated by that idea of being a part of something. We are hardwired to be in community together. And never have we felt that more than during this time where we've been isolated from each other or socially distancing from each other. So that idea of being a part of something is a critical nature of our gatherings that we've always wanted to build in, but especially now. Additionally, the recognition component, to be known, is a huge driver for why people give. And finally, our mission, how we make a difference, how we make an impact. And so going into the virtual setting, we knew we had to carry these elements in. And now as we're thinking about a hybrid setting, we know we need to make sure that these elements continue to move all the way through our planning process. If you frame your virtual event as a heartbeat, as that sort of driving underneath layer of your hybrid plan, you can really build these 3 factors in. Now, during COVID, we learned some other things that I want to frame as well, because there's some key pieces we want to take away. First, we learned that the revenue model shifted. Before COVID, in our revenue models, galas were really the most popular form or model of event, often because they're social events, they're fun. You have the added element of alcohol, couples attend together, there is that networking component, but you have so many revenue pieces tied to galas that they were by far the most common type of fundraising event, not the only, but that was really what we moved into thinking about. How do we replace that in a virtual setting? All of the revenue streams sort of fell into two key areas for us. We were looking at our revenue that happened before the event, tied to admission, tied to sponsorship dollars, and our revenue that happened during the event, tied to the appeal, a live auction, and even activities and games and silent auctions. Now, very quickly in a virtual setting, we started to see a shift happen. The giving that is above the line, that is relationship-based giving, if we can stay on that slide for a second, thank you. Relationship-based giving, that is sponsorship dollars, table sales, that direct ask for support, those were all climbing rapidly. And we saw during COVID that people were giving as a way to really impress and make a difference on the world they wanted to see. But we also started to see transactional giving declining. So we weren't seeing as much support in auctions and games, things like that. And so we have now really adapted this model and started to look at how do we build our events really based on that relationship revenue and start to lose the transactional revenue. It tends to be where we spend most of our time and see very little income. And now in this COVID time, we've seen even less income. So other things to take away from COVID. We learned in the virtual event setting that there was a lot that we could do to really make for an inclusive environment. All of a sudden, we were no longer restricted by a ballroom location or the capacity of a ballroom. We were able to now have a broadcast that could go out to a broader world, and we were having family members from other states, other countries tune in and participate. So access was created, but it didn't feel like an event. We really started to understand it felt like a TV show. It was this opportunity to tell your story and to have this very intimate engagement one-on-one, where you were talking to your donors directly through the screen. But the big success that we found was that because technology advanced very quickly, we were able to show donors' names on the screens, and we were able to recognize them live in real time. Now, that accomplished a couple things for us. It helped people feel like they're a part of something. It helped them be seen and recognized, and it helped them to really feel like they're making an impact. So for us, the giving started to soar when we started to do that on-screen recognition. It also was a more inclusive model. So we want to make sure as we move into hybrid that we're thinking about inclusivity and we're not limiting ourselves by just what the capacity of the ballroom might be, but we're thinking about how to create an inclusive space. Now, we started to test this idea of donor stewardship in real time because we had donor giving really start to increase at certain times of our virtual events, and we wanted to understand what the motivating factors were. And we learned quickly that as soon as we saw names on the screen, giving started to happen and the giving started rolling in. As soon as the names went away, giving started to decline. So we really found that donors were motivated by that idea of seeing their name on the screen. It's a very interesting way to be able to participate in a viewing experience. Unlike TV, where the TV doesn't talk back to you, all of a sudden we are having this experience where your action created a reaction from the TV, and the host could say your name and your name would appear on the screen. And that was driving giving like we've never seen before. In pre-COVID times, we never used thermometers at events. And now that thermometer is really creating this collective action where people are incredibly motivated. So as we move into hybrid, we're adapting and pulling through the hybrid idea that our audiences are driving toward a collective action using a thermometer, having name recognition, and being able to participate whether they're at home or whether they're tuning in virtually. Now, there were two new phenomenons we started to see. First, we started to see Fill the Gap as a huge driver. Well, donors were giving again or giving even larger gifts at the end of the appeal because they were really motivated and inspired to help close the gap and reach the goal. The other thing we started to see were organizations were very strategically building much bigger goals than they thought they could attain during the event, so that they could then use this event as an ongoing campaign to fill the gap after the event. And it was very, very effective at helping people really increase their fundraising. The second thing that we saw was this opportunity for recall giving. That's that idea that when we're in a ballroom, we're giving gifts level by level as the gifts are rolling in, and we're not able to sort of step back and say, you know what, never mind, I want to double my gift. And yet here in this format, people are able to give any type of gifts at any time. Now, the transactional giving shifted dramatically, and we saw online auctions were really, if we can move to the next slide, were really where we saw a lot of success. The online auction format allowed donors to participate and shop like they would on a shopping website. And that's where we started to see 85% of revenue coming in our auction, versus previously silent auctions were bringing in about 40% of revenue and live auctions about 100. So we're adapting into hybrid events, retaining the online auction element. Finally, corporate sponsors is the other element that we're retaining. This has continued to climb during the virtual world. If we can advance our slide. The corporate sponsorship has continued giving, but what we are hearing from our sponsors is that they are not planning to attend events right now. So as we start to plan our hybrid events, moving into our last slide here, we are recommending that you think about your events as smaller attendance, because our sponsors are not attending in as high of numbers. We're really seeing major donor investment in attending. And for success in your hybrid event, we want to make sure that you have a more inclusive space where you can engage both an at-home and an in-person audience, one single landing page where you can direct your viewing audience to, and they can take all actions like donate, bid, buy a raffle ticket. And you want to make sure that the donor recognition for your in-person and for your virtual is the same. We want guests to have an experience that feels equitable and feels like everyone is included. So those are just some things about building, but I know Angie has a very specific event that she can share as an example. So Emily, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Thanks so much for those insights, Sam. Angie, could you share some results from the Houston Ballet's 2021 hybrid ball? And I'm hoping you can also explain which aspects of your approach worked particularly well and why you think that was.
Thanks, Emily. I'm delighted to share a little background about our Ballet Ball home edition that we did. Ballet Ball is one of Houston Ballet's signature special events and is typically a year-long planning process for us. We started planning for our February 2021 ball in early 2020, even before the pandemic started. Thinking about the last almost 2 years, there has been so much uncertainty. Back in 2020, like now, we were optimistic that life would go back to normal soon. Every month brought new information. We knew vaccines were coming, but we didn't know when. Some of our patrons were and are today much more eager to gather in more traditional ways. Some are much more hesitant. So we knew we needed a very flexible model to engage our ballet family, which I'll talk more about. Very early in the process, we needed to set a revenue goal for the budget. In pre-pandemic times, our ballet ball raises about $1.5 million or more. And I honestly didn't know what to expect early in 2020 about during the pandemic. So I set our goal at 30% or $500,000. We're so fortunate that many of our top relationships support the ball each year over and above their annual support. And I felt those nearest to us would still support our organization and our mission regardless of the event format. But with the complexities of the pandemic, we might lose support from donors who are more chair dependent, not as connected to our mission, or more socially motivated. And that's generally what we found. You see here, we raised about $850,000 gross, including $88,000 from the silent auction, which greatly surpassed the budgeted goal I mentioned. But it is roughly half of what we typically raise in tables, tickets, and silent auction. For us, Ballet Ball represents the culmination of a fundraising campaign that supports the event. We do have a silent auction, but we typically don't do paddles up or have the pressure of a live auction. Many of our Ballet Ball patrons support us in other ways throughout the year, and we want our gala to be a very special experience for them. Overall, our attendance was lower than a typical in-person evening with about 250 guests. Typically, we see about 500 guests to our gala. I'm so pleased to be able to share an excerpted version of the digital content of our Ballet Ball Home Edition, and you'll see the Vimeo link at the bottom of the screen along with the password. And I hope that as you watch it, it might inspire how we'll talk about some of the concepts today, how you might be able to tailor them to your own organization. So I know I don't need to tell this audience that fundraising follows engagement, and engaging our top potential underwriters and supporters in our hybrid model was instrumental to our success. Chairing Ballet Ball in our community is something truly special, and we didn't want our chairs to feel that their year was compromised. Moving forward with the growing awareness that we're living with COVID for quite some time, we've moved beyond that sentiment to some extent, but it was a real consideration last year. We gave our previously identified chairs the option to defer their service for a year, which they accepted. Instead, we engaged a ballet ball committee largely made up of past ball chairs, past board presidents, and special events major supporters. We asked their help in signing letters, securing auction items, and following up with others to encourage their social circles to participate, much like we ask of our volunteers during traditional galas. Many of them were also part of the presentation that evening. We asked them to fill themselves in advance and then submit their clip to be included in the evening's pre-recorded program. Again, thinking about what worked well for our hybrid, having a 70s disco theme made it fun for our supporters to participate and fueled their engagement with the evening. A 70s Saturday Night Fever vibe was also something that they could easily do in their own homes, and it harkened back to the very first ballet ball, which took place in the 70s. The theme was threaded through the ballet ball promotional material, our invitation decor, our digital program, and our guests really got into the theme as well, as you can see here. Dressing up and sharing their photos with us and on their own social media, our disco theme lent itself well to a Spotify playlist with a QR code that's imprinted on this cute 45 record in the middle picture. Unfortunately, due to artistic rights, many of the disco theme elements are specifically removed from the Vimeo digital recording that I shared, but you can still get a sense of the disco vibe towards the end with the film credits. I mentioned at the start that we needed to be flexible to respond to our donor family. Some are eager to be back together and some are very hesitant. And we wanted people to be able to gather the way they felt most comfortable with their own social circle, with their own protocols, or even via Zoom if that was their preference. We had trustees, like on the bottom right, that erected a tent in her backyard and invited more than 30 of her closest friends to celebrate. One of our past presidents on the top right invited a few close friends to celebrate in her backyard. Some of our older patrons hosted guests via Zoom, with our delivering meals to separate locations and then hosting a Zoom toast to bring them together. And then you can see one of our trustees celebrating with her delightful kids, something that we don't typically see much at a ballet ball. We provided top-notch catering, some decor elements, some Zoom support, and relied on our table hosts for setting the safety and gathering parameters. I'll talk a little bit more about what was included in table underwriting and what was considered an upgrade in a future slide. On the next slide, I just want to talk about some of our key lessons learned that we're going to incorporate into our hybrid events moving forward. First, we want to make sure that we give our donor family the opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to our organization through committee service, by hosting their family and friends, by providing testimonials of their support, helping our donors gather and celebrate their generosity and impact with their friends and a like-minded community is critical to our success. We'll also consider how top supporters might participate throughout the evening. They get excited about this participation and want to share that with their friends and family. And again, you'll see some examples of that in the Vimeo. Second, helping our patrons connect and engage with their own social circle. A hybrid model allows our supporters to engage with their social circle how they feel comfortable, as I mentioned, in the traditional gala format, in their homes, or even in Zoom. Third, providing information and exclusive content that builds their connection with our organization. For us, it's connecting our patrons with our dancers and leaders in our donor family. It's about providing a unique experience that excites them and inspires them. And again, I hope that you'll see that in the Vimeo link. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Angie. So now let's dig a little deeper into planning. Fundraisers tell me in my reporting that program is the most important part of an event. So, Sam, where do you recommend people start when building the program for a hybrid?
That's a great question. So There's a couple key things that Angie said that I really want to build off of. She said a flexible model, and I think that that's really important. We are now beginning to enter the age of reentry. I think in 2020, everything was virtual. In 2021, only about maybe 5% of the events that we saw were hybrid. And now we're expecting in 2022 that we're going to flip that, and we're going to see probably 95% of our events to be hybrid. So a couple of key things that I wanted to just start with, because I think that that's the number one challenge that we're all facing, is how do we even begin? First, I want to really encourage you to do a risk assessment. I think it's important for your organization to have an understanding of what your comfort level is. That will then inform a whole bunch of your choices. And we have a risk assessment tool on our website available, but that will be a process that allows you to then make some decisions because you understand what your board is comfortable with and what you're comfortable with. Additionally, we recommend a guest survey because a guest will inform you. We're seeing right now a lot of our guest surveys are coming back with about a third of our audience really leaning into supporting 100% in a ballroom the way it had been in the past. But 2/3 of our audience say, yes, we'd be interested if it's outside or if it's going to be something that we can participate in a socially distanced way. So understanding your guests' comfort will help you make some decisions. And in fact, we've been surveying guests now, and we've been surveying guests later so that we understand how to plan and how to adjust. All right, now we have a little bit more information coming from our staff and board, a little bit more information coming from our guests, and now we can start to plan for a virtual program, in-person program, and safety protocols, which are all the decisions we need to make about how to move forward. Now, when we start to make those decisions, let's go to the next slide. We have two different audiences we're considering. We have the audience that are extroverts that have felt deprived during this time that really want this immersive, connective experience. And we have an audience that are introverts that are not feeling that same connection, that are wanting to have a little more distance. And so hybrid gives you that opportunity to really think about serving both audience needs, and it gives you the opportunity to be able to have a gathering where people feel like they're seen, but that gathering might be smaller. And what we're really planning for in 2022 are smaller gatherings that are immersive, intimate, connective. They're mighty, but a lot of viewers still tuning in virtually. Okay, so let's take a phased approach in our planning. First, my recommendation is, in order to reach that flexibility that we were talking about earlier, is that you plan with virtual event as your base. That means you have a way for sponsor benefits, you have a way to begin designing your program content, and you have a way to be able to move forward in your planning. Now, as you are getting closer to your event, it is easier to add the gathering elements than it is to take away. If you have to cancel everything and take everything away like we did in 2020, we're just reliving the 2020 experience again. But most organizations we're working with for 2022 have a plan A and a plan B, in which plan B is that they can always strip back to virtual only if they need to. Plan A is that they're gathering people currently in smaller type gatherings, similar to Angie's group, where everyone is able to participate in a way that they felt comfortable with. So smaller gatherings really rely on content or program developed for the screen that is going to be watched in something like a screening party, a house party, or the opportunity to watch at home alone if that's what feels safest. Then I think as time progresses in 2022 and into 2023, we're going to see larger hybrid events where we're really designing content for a stage, and that content is being broadcast to a bigger audience at home. So start first with virtual as your base so you can solicit your sponsors so that you can build your content for the screen and add those gathering elements. But hybrid isn't one way. Hybrid could look a million different ways. So let's talk about all the different ways hybrids can show up. First, designing that powerful program. When you're designing your powerful program, you need to think about your audience as that is in person, having an opportunity to really understand and connect to mission and to each other. But your program that is broadcast is really going to be your opportunity to tell your story. You want to make sure to focus on relationships and stories because that's where your biggest return is going to be. And revenue models, you want to focus on your sponsorship or your underwriting, and you want to focus on that appeal or that direct ask for support. Those are your two biggest revenue buckets with the most potential. They're really relationship-based type revenue. Additionally, plan for a smaller in-person gathering. Don't plan on returning immediately to a ballroom of 500 people. We are not seeing audiences respond in that same number. Plan for a smaller gathering, but something that is meaningful and helps to build connection with your donors. Now, in helping us to look at the future and plan forward, we've been really inspired by the work of Priya Parker. She has a book called The Art of Gathering, in which she asks, what if we were really gathering around purpose? And that really reframes for us how we start to design our program. And as we've gone through a couple of workshops with Priya Parker and we've read through her book and listened to her podcast, we've really developed 2 steps in our planning process to begin our hybrid plan. First, we want to make sure we set a goal. What is the change or the impact that we want to see when gathering people? Not just the metrics of attendance and fundraising, but also what is the impact we want to make. We did this exercise with a client of ours that is a social service organization, and their goal that they identified after a lot of discussion was that they really wanted to be able to transition out of the pandemic, celebrating the heroic effort that the staff made to support people with vaccinations. It was the hardest their staff had ever worked. They've had a really hard couple of years while also managing school at home and all sorts of other challenges that we've all been facing. And so they wanted to make their staff the center of the event. What that did was it allowed them to really think about who was in attendance at their event and what their event model would be. So for their hybrid event, they designed an event in which it would be broadcast out for home viewers. They would have watch parties similar to Angie's home galas. They would have watch parties hosted by board members to bring together small groupings of donors. And they would invite their staff with one spouse to be the in-studio audience. That way, their staff really got to be a part of the story. They were the heroes of the story. They were the honorees. They really got to be celebrated and uplifted, and the party was for them. And then step 2 in our decision-making process is identifying what our key values are. So what are the key elements that will make the event feel successful to us and uniquely us? Here's an example we came to with another organization. For them, the benchmarks of success were not the benchmarks of headcount, but instead were things like safety. And because safety was something they were really keyed into, they decided that they would do health screenings at the door, smaller pod seatings instead of tables of 10, and they would reduce any roaming by having no open bars. Instead, everything would be brought to you at your table. They also had a value that they wanted to really be focused on their mission and not on the stuff. So instead of selling auction items like baskets, they were really selling things that were connected to their work, like experiences tied to dinner with the artistic director or backstage tour or naming a puppy or being able to be involved by sponsoring a program. All of those things were doing better in the pandemic, and so they really leaned into that as part of their planning decision. Third value they identified was that they wanted to be transparent in their goals. So they decided that they would use a thermometer, and they wanted to celebrate everyone that was giving, so they used a text-to-give platform so that their in-studio audience and their home viewing or watch party audiences could all give in the same format. Finally, they identified that they wanted to recognize every gift, so they invested time in their program for that, and they wanted to include everyone, which the text platform would allow them to do. So really, this for us has been the shape that we've been using to create a flexible model for what hybrid can be. We are adding the in-person element as sort of an addition to the broadcast or the virtual component. Right now, we've seen a lot of house parties. That is a celebration in which the host has an agreement field of what they feel is safest to them, We provide a house party packet with instructions and information, and a lot of our organizations, like Angie's, also provide food or catering or wine. And then we provide information about how individuals can give from the viewing party. The interesting thing that came out of this was that it allowed us to tag together the watch party model with other models like peer-to-peer, where we could have the house parties competing against each other. We're not only showing the thermometer grow, but we were also starting to show things like who was taking the lead on the leaderboard, and we could see how much funds the house party had raised. So we have a couple of examples for that for you to take a look at on our website. We also have a free house party watch kit that you can download. Finally, some other forms of hybrid events have started to take shape. A few types of events we've produced that have been hybrid. We've had a drive-in virtual event where we were broadcasting to an in-person audience that were in their cars. We also had an outdoor screening event where we were broadcasting to an audience that was watching from the lawn of an amphitheater. That allowed folks to feel like they had the ability to safely distance and the ability to have good airflow quality so that they weren't necessarily in such a high-risk situation. And the trend we're really seeing now is in-studio audiences. So this means that a lot of our events are starting to have our live host that is broadcasting in a studio with a small audience gathered. You still need to consider safety elements, but one of the elements that you can really control is how many people are together. And a smaller audience seems to be something we're hearing that people are much more comfortable with. The other element about this is that it allowed us to gather people in a theater-style setting with masks and then to invite them outside for the networking and celebration after the broadcast was over. So a couple of things to think about when you're planning for your program. You want to curate what is online. You want to make sure that what you stream online are the program elements of your event. You don't want to stream the dance party that your guests at home can't participate in. But you do want to streamline your speakers. You want to streamline your storytelling element, or stream your storytelling elements. That means that your experience at the event in person might be a little bit different than your home audience. But your home audience has the opportunity to participate in the things that feel really connected during a virtual program, like in the chat, giving during the event, watching the stories, watching the speakers. And finally, that recognition piece is the big thing that we're taking away from virtual, that we're moving into hybrid. We are really aiming at the inclusivity element and making sure that every donor gets recognized the same. So if you were doing a live appeal, similar to what you would have done as a paddle raise in the past, we are now doing this text to give model that as soon as the text is received, the donor's name appears on the screen. So a donor at a watch party, a donor in the room, in the studio audience, a donor in the ballroom, a donor at home alone can all receive the same recognition. This tool that you see here is Give Lively. It's a free tool, which is one of the reasons why we love it so much, but it allows us to sort of meet those two needs of recognizing all audiences the same. Emily, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Oh, Emily, I think you're muted.
I'm here. Sorry, I couldn't switch back to the pod. Sorry about that, and thanks for bearing with my technical difficulties earlier, Sam. So we have time to take a couple questions, and there are a lot coming in. One thing that a lot of folks are asking is kind of like the timing element. So, Angie, I wonder if you can answer this. Michelle asks, are you suggesting that the online event content is happening simultaneously with the in-person content, or should we be developing programming for each that provides the right kind of experience for the participants?
Angie's muted. Emily, while Angie gets unmuted, I can just add to that. Yeah. I know that my answer to that would be yes, and there's a million ways you can do this. And I think that they can all be effective. But we have found that the virtual audience has about an hour of attention before we start to lose their attention span. And so we've really tried to make that the broadcast element is an hour of the program. And typically for us, we find that the biggest return on investment, the energy you are putting into the event, we can maximize by broadcasting the live program at the same time to the audience at home versus having two separate elements happening.
That makes a lot of sense. And one more question, since we're here. So this, Helene asks, this appears to be focused on watch party events. Can we discuss how to make sure the on-site party attendees feel appreciated and not neglected when they're trying to engage with virtual attendees? Angie, if you're back up, maybe you can go ahead and answer that.
Yes, I apologize. I had a little technical difficulty there. Absolutely, I think we are moving forward with more in-person gatherings. I agree that has to be really special. I think we do our model a little different. We don't sort of live stream it, and so I actually think that might be a better question for Sam.
We're really focused on making sure that we have a really good host. So if we're doing both elements at the same time, we want a host that can navigate the fact that there are two different audiences having two different experiences. Mostly, we put it in the script. And so we have elements of the program scripted to acknowledge and inform the other audience that the other audience is there. So things like, hello, for everyone joining us at home, then also addressing, and for our audience here in the studio or here in the ballroom. So we have elements that are scripted to both audiences and moments where we actually script the host to look out to the room or to look directly at the camera, so that we're really being thoughtful and intentional about those two specific things. But similar to what Angie's done, I recommend pre-recording a lot of your content, because then all audiences are looking to the screen to see that pre-recorded content. For us, the thing that we found so successful was the live fundraising. So that's why we have a host that's live, but all your storytelling elements can be pre-recorded. So that element could sort of be less stress and much more ease because everyone's looking to a screen to see it.
Gotcha. Thank you both so much. And just a reminder, if other folks have questions, you can submit a question at any time. You just type it in the box at the top right corner. And at the end of the session, we'll answer as many questions as we can. So we're going to go back to Angie now. And Angie, I'm wondering, could you share your perspective on how to make the most of a hybrid event?
Absolutely, Emily. I think as fundraisers, we know at Days In, we have a budget goal to meet or exceed, and having underwriters is key to our financial success. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we approach that in a hybrid model. 6 to 9 months before the event, we identify and solicit our major underwriters. You can see an example of our underwriter level letter here. I know most of you are fundraisers, but to cover some of the basics, our ball committee names run along the side. Often they'll initial, write personal notes, draw little hearts to personalize these letters, especially for people that they know. Our community wants to support their friends and connections, so that level of personalization is an important aspect of the underwriter letter, as is our honoring our event honorees. Including our event honorees. Not only is this meaningful recognition of our honorees, ideally we'll be able to tap into their networks of supporters as well. We fundraise for our hybrid ball the very same way we fundraise for our in-person experience. We typically send the underwriter letter to our trustees, past event supporters, corporate partners, as well as those identified by our committee chairs or honorees 5 months before the event. The underwriter letter and the related follow-up ideally is the primary fundraising vehicle for the event. The actual invitation listing all of our supporters follows about 2 months prior to the big day. Here you can see an example of our table and ticket levels and our reply device. We also offered these opportunities online so that people could anywhere in the world could come and look at us. We're typically focused on our trustees and those who traditionally buy high dollar tables. Ideally, our chairs and honorees are also high level table buyers. Certainly, we consider capacity and strength of relationship as part of our criteria for selecting chairs, and even to some extent our honorees, although I also prioritize honorees being an authentic recognition. We're very focused on those with capacity and interest to commit $50,000 and $100,000 tables. And this, of course, is a year-long cultivation and stewardship process. I realize that 50 and 100,000 may seem a lot for many organizations, and I can tell you for the first few years, our focus was primarily on $15,000 and $25,000 tables. It took several fundraising cycles, several years to be able to identify, cultivate, and secure higher table levels. Once we broke the $50,000 threshold, several lead supporters, particularly among our chairs and honorees, followed suit and established a precedent that we could build upon. And then we had that same dynamic again at 100,000. Obviously, special event prospecting goes hand in hand with your board development strategies to ensure you have a strong pipeline of supporters. For any event, we hope that to have 70% of regular buyers from trustees and those special event supporters who return year after year. Given that we didn't have traditional chairs for our inaugural hybrid event, we released ourselves from the expectation that we would have 30% new table and ticket buyers. We focused on those closest to us and asked them to help us spread the word to their circles. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about our catering and decor upgrades. I mentioned earlier that we had a flexible model where table buyers were able to host guests to their comfort level. To accomplish this, we provided a base level of service to table underwriters and ticket buyers around decor, food, wine, and gift bags. Table buyers could choose between a couple of Houston-based caterers that are highly skilled for gala events. Caterers serve food during a predetermined window and left the host with some preparation instructions to finish off the dish. The quality of the food and wine was an important element, and delivered food needed some final preparations like heating and adding sauces to ensure great quality. Red and white wine and Prosecco were also part of our table package. Some hosts worked with the caterers to enhance what we were able to provide beyond our as an organization, like our trustee who erected the tent in her backyard. That is, we provided a budget of selected items depending on the underwriting amount, and some hosts choose to enhance those items on their own. Engaging supporters prior to the event was also something before and during the event was something that was critical to our success. We regularly hosted about quarterly calls for trustees and supporters as an opportunity to hear about what's going on at the ballet, our COVID protocols and plans. I think these calls were instrumental to buy-in for the event. People understood the need for a hybrid model, even here in Texas, where things are sort of getting back to normal. Because we are a ballet company, dancer participation, meaning our patrons have the opportunity to meet, dine, and even dance with our dancers, is a big part of what makes our special events really special. We now have safety protocols, which I'll talk about later, that restrict some dancer participation. But I think a big part of people accepting these protocols and celebrating a hybrid model was all the communications and updates we continue to provide. We found that many of our supporters will tune in for a 15 to 20 minute Zoom call every other month so that we can share latest news, our protocols, and what we're working on. These calls help set the expectation and were critical to our ballet family, as I said, accepting the hybrid model and building community support. Engaging key committee members during the program was also critical for us. I'll talk more about the live program in a minute, but I wanted to again highlight the importance of engaging as many people in the hybrid event as possible. We asked key committee members to record themselves to promote the auction, to congratulate our honorees, to participate in a drawing, and to share their best ballet ball memory. And again, you'll see examples of that in the Vimeo link on my very first slide. We mentioned that we pre-recorded all of our programming. I mentioned that was a strategic decision for us. You'll recall that our initial fundraising goal was $500,000, which would put our ideal expense budget at about $150,000. We knew we really wanted to prioritize food and beverage, and as a performing arts organization, we could tap into some of our organizational assets to help keep the production costs down. We didn't use a production company, but we did hire a videographer and an editor to help facilitate a strong digital program. Because most of the fundraising, save for the silent auction, happened prior to the event, that model worked really well for us. It allowed us to have absolute control over the content and to integrate many of our supporters into the evening as they, as I mentioned, self-recorded clips under our direction and submitted them to us. Still, we wanted to try and capture the excitement of a live event as much as possible. And we did this by having a specific release time that for the recorded content that went live on Vimeo at 7 o'clock. The silent auction ran through and ended during the evening. We had 2 live drawings during the event and delivered winning prizes that evening. The digital release featured fresh content previously recorded but not widely or at least recently seen. We really wanted to showcase content that was different than other virtual events we had seen. The content was less focused on directly selling our mission or program, although showcasing our dancers and their work was critical. Our goal was to provide a special experience, keeping our patrons connected to the ballet community. We had set a lower goal, expecting it not to be as revenue driven, but ultimately found that many people wanted to support this event and still made top table purchases. For having their name and photo in the society pages is the type of recognition some donors really want. Sometimes media outlets will send their own photographer and will also extend invitations to key media contacts to participate. As I mentioned, we also hire photographers to ensure we capture striking images of our key relationships. We submit event briefs and photos to our local society pages for event coverage. In our market, which is Houston, nurturing strong relationships with our press contacts is really important. After the event, we evaluate our efforts. Dollar raised, of course, is very important, but also who did we bring closer to the organization? Are they more connected? Did we identify new prospects that we can engage in the coming months? How was our press coverage? Did we honor and recognize top supporters in a meaningful way? These are all important questions that we reflect on after the event. Emily, back to you.
Thanks, Angie. I'd like to get both of your thoughts on this next question. What should groups do to ensure that in-person gatherings are safe for staff and supporters? And what's the best way to inform guests about rules and restrictions of an event? Sam, could you respond first?
Yeah, there's something that really stood out to me in Angie's event model, and it is that she was really focused on relationships and put relationships at the center of every decision. And for me, safety is relationship-based also. It says to your donors, we care about you, and we're providing you the information you need to make a decision, because everyone has different challenges they're dealing with. Someone may be a caretaker for someone who's medically fragile. Someone else may have no really health challenges and feel very safe being in person. So the idea of safety allows us to put together a plan that also it allows your guests to make decisions about what works for them. So the number one rule I have about safety is that you have to communicate whatever decisions you have. Now, in some cases, if you have smaller watch party hosts, those hosts may want to set some of their own rules of gathering, how many people they want at the event, if they want people to be vaccinated or not, or wearing masks or not, if they want to have control over their guest list or not. Those are all things that are considerations. Now, there's 3 key things that we can control with this current pandemic. We can control how many people, we can control airflow, and we can control how long they're together. And so those are all things that you can modulate up and down depending upon the agreement that you come to. So number one, communication to your guests. It allows you to be supporting your guests, but it allows your guests to be able to make a decision. Next, I want to focus on a couple of decision-making resources for you. So I want to make a disclaimer that I am not a pandemic expert, and I highly recommend that you go and you get advice to your organization and your board from a legal expert and a medical expert. But there is a term called duty of care that I want to make sure you know. That is a legal term, but it is the term that represents all of the things we do when we gather publicly that we do to take care of each other. Things like fire marshal regulations about how many people can be in a space, food handling regulations about what you can do to make sure that people are eating food that's safe to eat. This pandemic falls within duty of care. There are things that we can do to reduce and eliminate and mitigate risk. So a couple of things for consideration. One is, what are the things that you're asking your vendors to do, and what are the things that you're asking your guests to do? I think it's really critical and important that you understand what your own risk tolerance is. Because if you do have a contagion, if you do have an outbreak, you need to be able to have a plan for how you're going to manage that. I don't think it's fair for a board of directors to encourage a gathering if they're not willing to come up with a plan around who's in charge of the crisis communication after. And so I think having a plan ahead of time around how you're going to communicate and who is communicating to county and health authorities, to your public through media relations, to your guests that were in attendance, to your sponsors, to your vendors, you have a responsibility to all of them. And having a plan in place ahead of time assures that it's easy to manage if you do have a contagion at your event. Now, I have a couple of links here I want to share, and we'll make sure that you have these as a resource. But there are some risk assessment tools that we have found very helpful for our boards in making decisions. Georgia Institute of Technology has a tool in which you can actually enter and get real-time stats for your area code with head count to understand how your head count is going to increase or decrease risk. The second thing is the CDC COVID data tracker is also going to tell you, we can go back one slide, there you go, is also going to tell you where you have risk challenges and what is a mitigation in your area. And finally, University of Washington Institute for Health Metrics is going to be a predictor for you to be able to understand how much risk is at your event if you're gathering in person. These three tools, I think, allow you to make decisions about those things we can impact, which is size of venue, how many people are gathered, the duration that people are gathered, and the airflow. How are you indoors? Are you outdoors? So moving to the next slide, I want to offer that on our website, if you click on virtual hybrid events in the upper right-hand corner, there's free tools for you to download, including a risk assessment tool and a guest survey that will help inform your safety decisions. Emily, back to you.
Thanks so much, Sam. Angie, do you have anything you'd like to add today?
Yes, I mentioned that at our ballet ball, we left it to our patrons to decide their own comfort level and safety protocols in the example that we've been talking about. But since then, just a couple months ago, we had our first fully in-person special event, and I wanted to share an example of the safety protocols we shared with guests. It was a fully vaccinated, we required guests to be fully vaccinated to attend. And that was in an effort to ensure that dancer participation that I mentioned earlier, that we have a requirement that all of our dancers be vaccinated. And so to be able to have them included in the special event, we also required that all of our patrons be vaccinated. We found that was generally accepted. We didn't have any real people understood and accepted these protocols, particularly acknowledging the health and safety of dancers. We found that we already in our group have a highly vaccinated group. We had a couple of troublesome instances with a major donor who was unvaccinated or a key relationship that was only partially vaxxed. And honestly, we're still working through how to deal with that over the long term. Of course, we provide refunds to guests that can't attend, and we look for other ways to engage with them and to ensure that they feel special and connected with the organization. I wanted to mention that we use Bindle. It's an inexpensive app that allows guests to upload their vaccination records and test results, but still protect their privacy. We offered that option, or our patrons could just text or email us a picture of their vaccination card. And I will say that we had an event of 200, 195 of them, I think, emailed or texted us. We did have a few people submitted through Bindle, but most people just submitted their vaccination records to us. We verified those and then deleted that information. At events, we are encouraging people to stay masked until seated, but it's very difficult to enforce. And there's a wide spectrum of guests that have been attending. And so again, I think it's just something that we'll continue to navigate. We've also offered to some table guests upon request the opportunity to have 6 or 8 tops instead of 10 or even 12 tops. But again, and people have been expressing the desire to return to normal. And so we have been following their lead in many cases. As Sam mentioned in an earlier slide, we find that corporations, our corporate supporters, are still determining their own guidelines. Individual corporate relationships have been purchasing single tickets, but for tables that corporations usually may use for client hosting or engagement opportunities, those have largely been pushed to future years. And I think that that's an interesting area for future consideration, for future conversation about how that will continue to evolve.
Great, thanks so much, Angie. I want to ask one more question of our guests before we turn to all of your questions. Could you offer advice for how to prioritize expenses and stay within the budget? Sam, I'll pass it to you first.
Sure. It's interesting because I think safety and budget can go hand in hand too, because we are finding that when we make safety decisions, we then have to make sure all of our vendors are also following those safety protocols. And in some cases, in fact, many cases, there is a movement happening across venues to enforce things like masks and vaccinations. So the venue becomes actually a sort of second layer of safety enforcement and a way for you to be able to share with your guests that the venue is requiring this. So a few other things, though, that have changed in hybrid considerations. First, virtual was delightful in the way that there was very little cost to do virtual events. And so when we saw all of a sudden our costs drop, we saw our net increase tremendously. Now, as we're starting to gather people back together and have an element of broadcast and an element of in-person, there's a couple of things that have decreased and a couple of things that have increased. Because our head count is decreasing for the in-person component, so are things like catering costs or the specific venue size can also be reduced because we're having smaller gatherings. But an increased cost of production, because now not only do you have the production in the room of the lights and the sound and the screens, but now you also need to have production of a live broadcast, which means you need cameras in the room and you need a live stream host. A couple of things to consider as you're making decisions is make sure that your venue cost and capacity are in alignment. I think that we are seeing a lot of shifts in venues about how they contract. And if you have a venue that does not have a rental fee, but instead has a food and beverage minimum, you want to make sure that that food and beverage minimum is appropriate for the volume of people you plan to feed. Meaning, in the past, you may have been putting 500 people in that ballroom, and you may have had a bill that was $65,000, and now you're only putting 100 people in the same ballroom, and you should not be paying the same $65,000, and yet that may be your contracted F&B minimum. So make sure that those two things are in alignment. Finally, when it comes to audio visual, a couple of things that can reduce your costs and mitigate costs for you. Have the same AV team that is both helping your in-person event with production and your live stream. When those two are working hand in hand and they know how to collaborate together, it will reduce your costs and save on staffing needs. Additionally, we recommend budgeting in for your in-person event to have confidence monitors on the stage so that your host can see what's happening in the virtual world as well. That way they can see the gifts coming in, they can see thermometers or name recognition, they can see chat. Those confidence monitors help to make sure and ensure that you have a good guest experience for both your at-home viewer and your in-person audience. Emily?
Thanks, Sam. Angie, how about you? What kind of budget considerations should folks be thinking about?
Thanks, Emily. For our hybrid event, our main expenses were catering, including wine and delivery. Vimeo, our platform, was already a resource that our organization was using, so it didn't add specifically to our event budget. We incurred expense, as I mentioned, for a videographer and an editor, though we didn't hire a full production company, which many organizations choose to do. We relied on the creative talent within our own company to create a run of show and to create the content outline. And I want to specifically call out Houston Ballet development staff, Alexandra Yates and Devin Antonetti, for their creatively envisioning and producing the content. I mentioned before that our budgeted goal for expenses was approximately $150,000. Our aim is for special event expenses to stay 35% or less of gross revenue, and our predominant expenses are usually catering, venue, and decor. Obviously, securing underwriters at the highest table levels is critical to our success, as I mentioned before. Engaging and securing high-level underwriters, predominantly individuals, is a year-long process that we manage through a portfolio system. The silent auction is the main driver of revenue during our gala. Unique trips and experiences perform well for us, and we often showcase these opportunities to our trustees and key donors prior to the event. Table guests also often bid and purchase items in recognition of their table host's invitation. For our hybrid event, our auction was made available to a wider audience, not just those attending the evening, but we opened it up a couple days before, much like so many other organizations we noted. But we did find that the majority of of our auction revenue did come from our ball patrons. Back to you, Emily.
Great, thanks. Our guests have inspired a lot of questions, so let's turn to those now. There's been a lot of questions about platforms and different tech tools. So I just want to start off our question and answer session by asking both Sam and Angie to give some recommendations for virtual platforms or technology tools that they particularly like using. Sam, do you want to start?
Sure, no problem. There are a couple of tools that we're using pretty regularly. I mentioned Give Lively. That is a text-to-give tool that gives you the thermometer, and it allows peer-to-peer campaigns. So if you have watch parties, you can have a leaderboard as well. It's a free tool. It's very simple to use, so that's why we recommend it a lot. We are streaming mostly on Vimeo with a backup stream always on YouTube, so that we have that opportunity to have a backup should something happen to one of the platforms. And it gives our viewers the opportunity to be able to tune in with smart TVs pretty easily. So if they're having a watch party, they can bring it up on their smart TV really easily. We're partnering with the AV department. The AV department is a live streaming, hosting, nonprofit support resource. They work only with nonprofit events, doing streaming events, and they are very cost effective. They're $3,500 to host the stream, host your Vimeo feed, your YouTube feed. They will help and support you in the planning. And then Classy and Network for Good have both created streaming tools within their platform, so that as long as you have a feed from a player like Vimeo or YouTube, you can have that player showing up in your platform so people can tune into Classy. They can give right there. They can see every gift come in and can see the content being broadcast within those two platforms. Finally, auction. We use most often Greater Giving. Greater Giving has a thermometer tool. It has a great auction platform, especially for online auctions. They were doing online auctions long before COVID, so it's a really built out, robust tool. And it also has now a viewing streaming platform built in. That's a new addition they've made where you can actually see a video or see the content and be on the bidding giving page at the same time.
Great. Angie, any that you want to add?
We use a lot of the same ones. And so I've mentioned that we use Vimeo. We also use Classy. That's been a great resource for us. We are just getting into Text Lively, or Giving Lively as a way to be able to text to give. So I concur with the resources that Sam had mentioned.
That's great. So I wonder, Sam, if I can go to you with this one. Joey asks, what would you say to convince a board of directors and executive director that want to return to a live, in-person, 300-person attendee event in 2022? How would you convince them that a hybrid event is still the way to go?
The first thing I would say is COVID has been a time of innovation, so why do what we've always done before? First. Second, I would say we need to understand what our board and staff and donors feel safe doing. And we've had this conversation with so many boards where there's one strong voice who feels really compelled by the in-person gathering. And then as soon as they surveyed their board, they found out that that was the only person who would be comfortable attending a 300-person ballroom event. Or vice versa, they surveyed their staff and found that they had no staff willing to work the event. Or they surveyed their donors and discovered that actually a number of their donors did want to participate in in-person gathering, but still some didn't, so they needed a way to meet the need. So I think it's important to meet that board member with data, get information, do surveys among your staff, among your board, and among your donors so that you understand how to build to the need of your specific community.
I might just add the other thing. I agree and say, and also I talk to my peers at other organizations and see what they're doing. I think, seeing what's going on in your community and what other like-minded organizations are doing is also important. And we talk to each other about what are your protocols going to be? How are you going to communicate them? Because a lot of our patrons go to all of these organizations and we want to be aligned, because what will happen, we went here and they didn't, but they are experiencing it different ways and they're going to communicate that to us as well.
That's a great point, Angie. And Angie, I want to stick with you for this next question. What sort of packages do you offer to your sponsors to still give at the same level to a hybrid event as they would give or used to give to an in-person event?
That's a great question. I would say for underwriting for individuals, a lot of those are mission motivated. And so the packages are really around, as I said, the catering and the food and the wine, and you can see those on the underwriting benefits that we provided. For corporate sponsorships, it's been a little more difficult. They, in the first year and a half, our corporations were still were supporting us, but declining the benefits, or we would deliver those items at home. My experience now is that a lot of corporations are delaying or pushing forward any new commitments for any in-person activities for a date uncertain. And so I don't think that will go on for forever, but I don't know that I have a good feeling on how that's going to resolve. Of course, we welcome all of our corporates to participate. We want to give them recognition, and there are many donors that are motivated by that. But when it comes to hosting their employees or client engagement, we haven't really. I don't think we're still working that out for the future.
I would add to that, Emily. We're doing a lot of work in the corporate sector, and we're seeing that actually a lot of corporate sponsors are going up. And the big thing we did was we just removed the in-person element. There is no ticket as a benefit. We're advising corporations that is an option if they want to attend, but it is not the benefit they are buying. And in the virtual world, we found, and now hybrid, you have 2 events happening essentially, so you double the benefits you can offer. There's actually a hybrid sponsorship package you can download on our website as well. But the response we're getting is, we cannot send employees, but we absolutely still want to attend or participate. And that participation is all about visibility, logo visibility. In the virtual world, when you're pre-recording your content, now you have the ability to pre-record a sponsor and have them in your program. Unlike at a ballroom where you would give them the mic and fear that the rest of the program ran away, you can now have a nice, tight, pre-recorded 2 or 3 minute segment from your sponsor that can be included. And we have a number of sponsors that have started to actually have advertisements that they send us as part of our pre-show. So literal commercials for their product, their service, their organization that we're playing as a part of the pre-show to the broadcast.
That's a great suggestion. And also to your point on kind of that now you're creating 2 events, Sam, if I can just stick with you. Stacy asks, with hybrid events, we have heard that there are actually 2 events in one. Those in the room and those in their homes. How do you recommend that we best staff or support those twin events?
I completely agree. It's 2 in 1. You have 2 different audiences. So the first thing we make sure is that we are only broadcasting our program. We're not broadcasting the pre-party, the dancing. We're not broadcasting the networking. We're only broadcasting our program. We then make sure that we have a tech support line and a chat moderator that is supporting our at-home audience. And then we have our standard registration volunteers that are checking our guests in person. And then we script our host to make sure that they're addressing both audiences and acknowledging so that both audiences know that the other audience exists. So things like we want to say hi to our at-home audience, viewers here in the room, say hi to our at-home audience. It's a really easy way to make sure that it's a very sort of uniformed and unified event.
Thanks so much. And Angie, you talked about this a little bit earlier in your presentation, but can you kind of dive in more to the pricing model that you all use? So David says, we charge for tickets at our in-person gala, but we did not charge anything when we did a virtual gala. How does it work with hybrid?
So yes, I mentioned before, we fundraised for our gala as we always do. And so we have an underwriting letter that goes out to our top prospects. We ask those that normally support our special events to come along on this journey with us, to know that we would respect and honor their support and do our best to deliver on a special experience. We provided, and so we sold tables and tickets along that same model. And again, I have those in the presentation of what was offered in each one. They started at, the top line of 100,000 and would go down to $15,000 for tables. And that included wine and decor and food, and the opportunity to support the organization and to demonstrate their commitment to the evening. We sold tickets to individuals, and we also had program access where anybody could just purchase a ticket for $250 to be able to access the virtual content without having the party aspects delivered.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And Sam, we've got a couple questions along this line. Tammy says, we have many donors longing for that social rubbing elbows element of attending our in-person event. What would you suggest for this surrounding those hybrid elements? So, and another person asked, what should my attendees do, my hybrid attendees do, while my in-person attendees get to chat and eat dinner together? How do you kind of keep people engaged?
Yeah, so I think your virtual audience is not participating in any of the chatting and networking and rubbing elbows. So your virtual audience is only tuning in for the program. If you think of it, I think the best way to get a really easy grasp on it is to think about Golden Globes. That's a great example. When you're watching the Golden Globes, there's a party going on in that room. They have people gathered at tables that are eating and drinking and socializing and networking, and then they have people on the stage that are broadcasting out. When they're getting ready to broadcast, there's an announcer voice that comes on and says, friends, we are getting ready to go live in 30 seconds. Please take your seats. We are going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, and then the music starts and they go live. And the speakers on the stage are speaking to the camera, to the at-home audience, and referencing the people in the room around them. So it's a really great example for you to think about, like, how does that experience work for two different audiences?
That's a great point. Angie, I've got a question here for you. What do you consider a small gathering? Jennifer says, we only ever had about 125 before COVID. So I'm curious, what size should we be planning for now? How did you all make that determination? You're on mute. Sam, do you have any thoughts while Angie finds her mic?
Yeah, I think that I think in Andrew's case, if I understood her model really well, they were making the host was making the determination. So the host was identifying what they felt safest with. I think the biggest thing you can do is do a guest survey, and then you'll have a better understanding of how many people plan to attend and feel comfortable. But having a flexible model is really important, because you may find that even though you're planning for 50 people, you may only get 20. So we had an event just this past weekend that was hybrid. We had an in-studio audience, and we were planning for about 45 people. And in the end, we had about 35 RSVPs and only 22 show up. as soon as the news changed to the Omicron variant, it changed how people felt and their comfort level. So I think you just need to plan on getting a lot of guest information and being in communication. Surveys are a really easy way to do that. And honestly, a survey is a donor cultivation tool. So a survey can help to inform a lot for you and help the donor to feel included in the process.
Thanks so much, Sam. This is my last question. I know it's hard to pick the last question, but Angie, if you're all good, I'm going to come to you. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts you can share. Katie says, do you have any data on gross versus net on these hybrid events? I'm assuming expenses are down in traditional categories, but new expenses arrive from broadcast and production costs. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So overall, I mean, I haven't done a broad survey, but I do know that for us, we kept our expenses in line. We try to have expenses of about 35% of our overall gross. And so for us, if we budget at 500,000, that expense would be around 150,000. And that's one reason why we didn't hire a large production company, because we really wanted to prioritize the food and beverage and making that a stellar experience. I think that I think the expectations that, we typically would in prior post-pandemic would have $1.5 million. We were aiming towards a $2 million bowl in the next couple of years. We've had to realign those expectations. I don't think that it's realistic to think that we'll land on that in the next couple of years, but keeping those closest to us is engaged and supportive, I think, is our top priority.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your questions, and also thank you to our guests. We're out of time, but I just want to remind you all, today's session will be available to view on demand in the next week. You'll receive an email from the Chronicle notifying you when it's available. And we hope you'll consider joining our upcoming webinars in 2022. And to Angie Lane and Sam Swaim, thank you for providing such valuable guidance and for sharing your many years of experience with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
And thank you all for participating. Take care.